It was a completely ordinary morning, but our main character could no longer sleep because the hose woke up and he was spinning in his bed. Because of the dumbbell, the main character suddenly jumped out of his bed and immediately grabbed his phone because he was afraid for his coins. Our main character was on edge and just begged him that everything would be fine with his cryptocurrency. His name was Chan Hong Chong. By the way, he was 32 years old. He graduated from his college but never achieved anything in his life. Like a real chushpan, he was unemployed and still lived with his parents, so this failure threw him out of life. He became interested in cryptocurrency with his friend until they completely collapsed along with the entire market. He immediately called his friend after that. Out of fear of Baby John, he began to shake and could not calm down his fishing rod, but his friend was completely calm because he believed that they would rise again and so they would become millionaires. His friend, just as he was watching the market at that moment and believed in Newton's third law, so now when the price fell, he was sure that it would immediately rise back. He tried to convince Hong Chung to think more positively about it so that he could buy even more since the price was low, but this only made him angry and he dropped the challenge. After this conversation, he could not come to his senses because in order to invest all his money, he worked very hard and this loss was global for him. But suddenly he was happy because he noticed that Baby John was ready to go fishing. It made him remember that he was quite optimistic. He was delighted, but suddenly he was frightened by a knock on the door. It was a girl unknown to us who came to throw napkins out of the room. But before she entered the room, he managed to hide under the blanket because he had a toy that no one should see except himself. She came to his room and noticed that he had just woken up, so she decided that she could clean his room herself in order to quickly take out all the trash. But he was a good guy and was worried that she would carry out his duties and tried to stop her because he himself could do it. But this girl was still able to convince him that she should do it because she wanted him to feel comfortable in this house. She immediately started cleaning the room in order to finish it as quickly as possible, but this guy suddenly started looking at something completely different from this cleaning. There was something much more interesting, namely 2 inflatable balloons that ended up behind this girl. Suddenly, they affected him very much. This made the toy begin to awaken, and this girl noticed this strange behavior, so she decided to find out what was going on there. The guy began to get even more nervous about this and was worried because she was very close to him, so he needed to take his mind off of it all. As it turned out, this girl was actually his stepmother, who was brought by his father to their house. But on the first day of meeting her, it seemed to him that she was not much older than himself. But even the father then immediately understood this and immediately threatened his son so that he would treat her well, because she was much older than him. The father was very angry with his son that day because Hoon Chong stayed in his second year of college, which upset the father very much for obvious reasons. Stepmother and father decided to go into the room, but the stepmother turned out to be kind and at that moment waved her hand to him because then they could not get to know each other properly. He was completely lost in his thoughts and even forgot that she was in his room, so several times he did not respond to his own name. She began to show him those places that were very dirty, but then she showed the other 2 huge balls, which he liked very much, but he felt ashamed and blushed. The stepmother began to worry about him because she thought that he was sick, and because of this, Baby John suddenly sulked and he blushed. She began to compare their temperatures, and then it seemed to her that his was high, so she suggested going for medicine so that he would recover quickly. But he refused because he understood that it would pass on its own very soon, and in fact he was not sick, but was simply very embarrassed. But despite the fact that he tried to prove to her that he was not sick, she did not listen to him and continued to insist on going to the store. But the toy was close to her, so he decided to play along. And it was at that moment that salvation came to him, because a message came to his stepmother's phone, and she now had to urgently leave there and leave him alone. It was the stepmother's younger sister who was supposed to come to them. She was already close, but did not know the address, so she went after her. As soon as she left the room, Hong Chung was finally able to breathe calmly, because he was very worried that she would notice Bobek. But he couldn't stop there because these thoughts filled his head, so he decided to play on the computer to take his mind off everything unnecessary. He had no choice but to play on the computer, but in one game there was a character similar to his stepmother and he liked it. At the same time, the stepmother returned home with her sister, who was very tired from the trip, although she arrived much earlier than she should have. She was so hot that she decided to climb straight into the refrigerator with her entire body. Stepmother was very surprised by this. As it turned out, the driver of their bus did not turn on the air conditioner the whole way, despite the heat outside, which tormented everyone traveling on this bus. The stepmother very quickly pulled her sister out of the refrigerator because she was worried about the bills that could come to them because of this act. There was nothing in the refrigerator to eat, so the stepmother was getting ready to go to the store and gave the medicine to her sister so that she could meet her nephew. The nephew, at the same time, still continued to play clams in depth and did not notice anything at all next to him because of the sound of the game. That was the end of the game because the aunt opened the door and saw not the best picture of how he ended his game. Hong Chong opened his eyes and was very scared because he didn't even notice how she entered the room. Now she knew what he was doing at that moment. At that moment, my aunt was very frightened and began to run away from the room to call her older sister for help because she thought that she had found a maniac. Hong Chong was very scared because if she ran to tell her sister about this, then he would be in huge trouble because of this. He ran after her up the stairs and noticed that she began to shout out her stepmother's name, so he immediately realized that it was Ha Yan's little sister. Hong Chong was able to grab onto it and stop it, but at that moment he could not keep his balance and fell straight from the stairs, so he accidentally grabbed the balls on the fly. He fell but immediately started apologizing to her for this misunderstanding because he didn't really mean to do anything bad to her. But at that moment she was very afraid of him because he accidentally touched the ball which he should not have touched. She started blaming him for everything he actually did and considered him a terrible person because she heard her sister's name while he was using a fishing rod. She was about to start mocking him again and use her hand to make him regret what he had done, but he managed to grab his hand. Then he was able to tell her that it was she who burst into the room without even knocking on the door, even though he was an adult. She was all in tears and was able to tell him that she had heard how he was playing and representing his stepmother, and for her, his sister. He tried to somehow justify himself, but the thought of how he could do this didn't even cross his mind. He just lowered his head, so he became downcast. He couldn't believe that this could even happen to him. Due to stress, he started crying right in front of her. Suddenly, the stepmother returned home from the store and was surprised that Hong Chung was sitting in the living room and not in his room. The stepmother very quickly noticed that Hong Chung had something wrong with his face. Then he told her that he just tripped on the stairs and fell. Because of her excitement, she didn't even notice how close she sat next to him and began to torment him, so he decided to do it smarter. At that moment, in order to avoid this embarrassment, he decided that he could just quickly run to his room to sleep because she thought that he was sick. Despite the fact that he avoided her in every possible way, the stepmother did not lose hope of getting closer to him. Because I wanted to become like a real mother to him. After a while, she prepared delicious food and invited everyone to the table so that everyone could enjoy this lunch. Hong Chong was very hungry, so he decided to rush for this food faster than anyone. But suddenly he was interrupted again by his evil father. His father got angry with him and started asking him about the job he was applying for, and a little later he even told him to teach his stepmother's sister. They were both very surprised at that moment, because they did not expect that their father would think about studying, because he would throw a fishing rod into this river. Her father thought that she was surprised because she did not believe that he could teach her, but then he told her that he graduated from a good university. Hong Chung of course didn't want to teach her, because he considered her a child who wouldn't even listen to him, but he had no choice. After that, the father became even more angry, so they both just had to agree to it, otherwise Hong Chung would have to look for a new home. Some time passed and Hong Chung finally collected all the necessary things and went to Irie's room to teach her the necessary things. But on the way there, he had a lot of regrets in his head, because if it weren't for the collapse of the cryptocurrency, he would now have his own house. But as soon as he entered there, he immediately noticed something that he could not even imagine before, because Irie was very beautiful. Irie was indeed a very beautiful girl, but Hong Chung did not notice this due to their rather unpleasant acquaintance. But despite her cute appearance, she was a rather rude girl in communication, which infuriated him very much. He came to her not empty-handed, but with textbooks from which he himself studied and was already planning to actually teach her lessons. But suddenly she put on headphones and told him to leave, because she considered this method outdated. She was going to study herself using video lessons on the internet. She didn't want to continue studying and just wanted to sleep, but he couldn't allow her to do that because she needed to study to enroll. Despite the fact that he was only trying to help her and teach her something new, she began to blackmail him with what happened earlier. She continued to mock him, but he decided to reprimand her about the way she was lying in front of him at that moment. But for her, this was just another reason to mock him, because she did not consider him a man, and even that he could behave like a man. But suddenly, Hong Chung began to act and decided to prove to her that he can punish her like a real man. At first, she was very embarrassed, but literally a second later, she was already interested and began to ask him how he would do it. Although he tried to play with his feelings, he only became embarrassed after that and could no longer answer her. She continued to tease him with the same interested look and did not show that anything was wrong. But suddenly she kicked him. That was her whole plan. He was going to tell his stepmother everything, but it was not in his favor. Aerie knew that he was playing with his stepmother in mind, so it would be very bad if she herself found out about it personally. She wasn't going to tell anyone about this, but only if he didn't pester her, otherwise everyone would know about it, after which he had to leave the room. He couldn't believe that he could let her catch him doing something like that. But leaving the room, he suddenly noticed his stepmother, who brought them fruit because she was worried about them, thinking that they were hungry. He then started the bobby and decided to quickly get out of there, because he didn't even know how long she stood there and what she heard behind that door. Hong Chang then immediately went to his friend's restaurant, so that they could rest there and relax there. A friend sat opposite him and listened to his every word about how he didn't like everything that was happening in his life. Some time passed, it was already late at night in the yard, and everyone in the house should have been asleep. Therefore, having come home so late, he had to be very quiet so that no one noticed it. Arriving home, he immediately went to the kitchen, because his father was already supposed to have left on a business trip, but suddenly his stepmother was behind him. They went to the room and there they decided to talk, because she was worried about him, because she understood that it was very difficult for him. She began to apologize for her little sister, because she knew that he was very hurt by Aerie's rude words. But he stopped her from doing this because he understood that it was not her fault, and Aerie did not want to listen to him, because he had not leveled up enough for her. But suddenly the stepmother decided to talk to him about the big bobby. In fact, she heard their previous conversation with her younger sister. At that moment, Hong Chung began to worry a lot. Then she decided to confess to him that she knew about how he played around thinking about her, but she was very ashamed. He was about to apologize and explain everything, but she stopped him because she understood him because he was still young. He didn't have a girlfriend and had a lot of free time, so she decided to give him a gift so that he could relax properly. This gift was a small magazine with similar games which he should have liked for fishing, but this would not help him because it was a very outdated thing. Nowadays, everyone plays games on their phones. The stepmother didn't know about it, but still really wanted to help him, so she asked about it directly. Because he returned home from the restaurant, he was not himself and asked her to play with the balls. He immediately realized that this was a mistake and it was a stupid request, so he wanted to refuse, but she suddenly decided to allow him. She did all this because she wanted them to be comfortable around each other, so she allowed it to be done. She couldn't believe it was right, but she had already consulted with a psychologist on the phone. The psychologist then recommended that she spend more time with the child and play with him, devoting time. Then they will be close. This psychologist was her friend, who had a little boy, but she did not know that her son would be a little older. Therefore, the stepmother took everything seriously and agreed to this, because she believed that this was the only right way for them to get closer. She was very embarrassed and wanted to stop him, but quickly realized that it would be even worse if she stopped him now. The stepmother could no longer do anything about it, because he had already started playing with the balls. Hong Chang couldn't believe that he was now playing with such soft balls. It seemed to him that he was only dreaming because of the drinks. But he would be very ashamed if at his age he dreamed of something like that, but he understood that it was too realistic. But Hunjung didn't care about that. He wanted to fully enjoy this moment even if it ended very badly. So suddenly he pulled the balls out of their case and began to use them fully, even though his stepmother tried to stop him. He was not going to do it. She understood that she needed to stop it, because otherwise it would go too far and there would be dire consequences. But at the moment when she was able to move him away from the balls and make him pause, she noticed a blade that was sticking out of the case. It was crazy, but Hong Chung was still able to get her to help him and start kneading the blade. Somehow this innocent boy was able to get to this point in the second. His stepmom found herself in her thoughts. And now he enjoyed this moment, because this was everything he had really dreamed of for a very long time. He didn't want to be the only one enjoying the game, so he helped her speed up the game. She felt very strange because despite the fact that Chang Hoon was now part of her family, she played with him and felt very good. But she could not do anything except hear strange creaking sounds from the ball that Chang Hong was playing with. Watching everything that was happening, Chang Hong could no longer restrain himself, so he decided to pretend as if he had warmed up and started the game. In fact, he did not connect the keyboard and just press the buttons on it even though that was the case. He was very pleased. Hayan at that moment felt every click from the keyboard. It was a very strange feeling at that moment. Suddenly, Chang Hoon stopped and Hayan thought that he really wanted to plug in the keyboard and start playing. But he just continued to dream about this game in his head and enjoyed it. Hayan also couldn't understand what she should do in such a situation and how to stop him. Chan Hong was very tired, so he couldn't maintain his pace of play for long and fell asleep very quickly after finishing. The next morning when he woke up, he couldn't believe that he could have dreamed about something like that with Hayan. But he understood that he shouldn't be ashamed because they weren't really doing anything, and then he suddenly noticed the magazine. It was the same magazine from the dream that his stepmother gave him, but he didn't immediately understand it. But even so, he didn't believe in what was happening. Suddenly, his stepmother burst into his room to call him to have breakfast together, because everything was already ready. At the dinner table, he could not take his eyes off her and did not understand how she could be so calm after such. He just stood and watched along with his guesses, because he couldn't believe that she could be interested in him. But Chan-hong couldn't stay with just guesses, so he decided to quickly check everything and went to help his stepmother. During his help, he suddenly thanked her for yesterday, and as it turned out, it really happened. But Chang-hong was at a loss because he couldn't believe that even after that she was silent and patient. Then he decided to go further and began to take advantage of this opportunity because she did not react in any way to his checks. She was very embarrassed and tried to stop him because she was very ticklish. And he took it as that she herself wanted to play with him because she does not resist. Chan-hong took advantage of this and again asked her to help him, but now he was completely sober. She tried to refuse, but she didn't succeed, and after a couple of minutes they were already in the same position as yesterday. Ha Yeon couldn't believe that she let this happen again, even though she shouldn't have done it. She had to stop him, but her body did not listen to her, and she could not say a word, so it continued. Chan-hong did not listen to her at all, and continued to do only what he himself wanted, and completely removed all the covers from the toys. Having removed all the covers from the toys, Ha Yeon still continued to hide them because of her embarrassment, but this only attracted Chang-hoon more. He couldn't hold back and really wanted to make fun of her, so he decided to take the opportunity to tease her. He started using a toy that belonged to her, and she immediately understood it because she felt her toys. It was very pleasant, and she could not contain her emotions, so her mind began to leave her. Chang-hong at that moment fully realized that she was not against this game, even though she said so. She, in turn, could not allow him to start a real game, because otherwise there would be no turning back. Despite his desire to start playing like an adult, Chan-hong tried to restrain himself and was just warming up. This was the last straw of his conscience that he had just lost because he accidentally started this game. Closing his eyes, he accidentally started it, but now he couldn't do anything about it even though he promised not to do it. She was very angry with him because she trusted him, but now it's all gone too far. Even though she was angry, she allowed him to continue in this position and pause the game. She didn't want to be angry with him because of this, because she understood that it was just a mistake. But suddenly the mouse's sensitivity increased. She really wanted to start the game, although she tried to restrain this desire, but Chan-hong understood this, so he decided to continue. They shouldn't have done anything like that, but it was too late, so she agreed for the one time because she couldn't hold back. This will be the first and last time, after which Chan-hong will have to understand his mistake and not repeat it again. What will happen right now will become a common secret for them, which they will have to keep. She felt very pleased during the game, but she did not want to admit it and pretended that it was not so. Although she tried to hide it, she couldn't do it, and so over and over again the balls were scored in the game. Chang-hoon really wanted her to confess her feelings to him, so he decided to say that it was only for today. But she started playing football with him only because he asked her for help. She had no choice. He understood that he could use this situation to his advantage, so he began to put pressure on Pity so that she would confess to him. Even though she was very angry at him for this, she didn't want to ruin his first game so that he would finish it without regrets. But she also understood that if she was stupid, it would never end if she continued like this. Although this was true, she understood that she herself offered to help him at that moment, and in fact, she even liked it. Chan-hoon at that moment was very interested in what she was thinking about, but he was absolutely sure that she was enjoying the game. Even though this was true, he was going to force her to admit it, and for this he needed to aim better at the goal. Then he asked to process the gate higher, but she understood that if she allowed this to be done, she would no longer get out of this. But she was still able to forbid him to do this. Although she forbade him, in return he did something else. At that moment she was worried that there would be marks on the fence, but he assured her that this would not happen. Immediately after he finished his match and was already in a good state of mind, she decided to clarify everything to him. But at that moment, Chang-hoon wanted to repeat this game again because he liked it very much, but he kept his promise. The stepmother noticed this at that moment and realized that it was very difficult for him, but did not help him with anything else. Some time passed, and when he was able to think normally again, he realized what he had done, because he crossed all boundaries. Now he couldn't even look her in the eyes because of shame and didn't leave his room. But then she herself suddenly came to his room to talk to him about something. He was excited. It seemed to him that she was worried about what happened between them because he was also very worried about it. But suddenly she started talking to him about how she was looking into educational institutions for her younger sister and asked him for help. Then he could finally breathe a sigh of relief because she came to him for help and not to scold him. She wanted him to check the educational institutions because she couldn't even navigate the city. Not like her sister. He, of course, agreed to help them with this, and at that moment she was very happy about it. Some time passed and they went to study these universities for her, but their stepmother was not next to them. When they got to the admissions office at this university, it was bad news for them, because all the times for admission to the university had already passed. Now it will be very difficult for them to get into any class, but Irie, on the contrary, was happy about this news just like a dunce. But suddenly an unknown woman approached them from behind, who was ready to help them with entering the university. As it turned out, this woman was an old friend of Chang-hoon, that's why she wanted to help him. Then Irie went home first, but she was not happy that they went there because she did not want to study. And Chan-hong himself went to a restaurant with his friend to thank her for this. It was an old friend from college whom he had not spoken to since graduation, but she was very kind. Selgi is one of several girls he was close to in college. She liked Chang-hoon back then, so she missed him. He was quite happy to sit and chat with her, because she was just as kind and sweet as in his college days. They talked about their jobs, but Chang-hoon couldn't tell her that he was unemployed, so he lied about working abroad. Selgi was very happy for him, so she invited him to go to the restaurant and celebrate his work. Chang-hoon was very embarrassed at this moment because she was sincerely happy for him and wanted to celebrate with him. Upon returning home, he immediately went to his closet to choose clothes for a date with Selgi. He didn't have much money and old clothes, but he was glad that he had a car for a while. But it was then that he learned that he did not have a car, although he was sure that his father had left it before leaving on a business trip. He started to get very nervous because he didn't want her to know that he had nothing. Selgi at the same time was still choosing clothes because she wanted to look beautiful in front of him. She went outside from her house and was then greeted there by a joyful Chan-hong. She was glad to see him like that because he was dressed in the same style he always wore in college. But she was even more surprised when she saw the car he arrived in. He had to sell the shares he invested in order to rent a car. They went on a date where they took a bunch of photos and visited a bunch of cool places and ate different delicacies. Towards the end of that day, they went to the cinema, but not an ordinary one, but in their car. There was a rather attractive film, but he was only interested in how to play with Selgi. Even though he wanted it, he needed to focus on the movie and not look at her. Chan-hoon was very embarrassed about this movie because he wanted to start acting more and more because of it. Then he decided to warn her that he would move away from there. But she was very embarrassed then. As soon as he got out of the car, she couldn't believe that she was so confused just because he called her. She was thirsty due to stress, but then she accidentally spilled her drink on herself. Chang-hoon was returning from the toilet and was worried that those scenes in the film were still not over. But upon his return, he saw a more awkward situation, because there Selgi was trying to get rid of wet things. But he decided not to cause any alarm, and simply began wiping the stain so that there would be no traces left on the rental car. He was worried about her because she spilled the coffee, but he didn't know that it was cold coffee, so everything worked out. She went to the restroom to dry off, but now she felt a little uncomfortable. Returning to him, she only thought that there would be a big stain in the car because of her. But at that moment, all his thoughts were filled with what he saw. After all, she brought a red case with her and it was a sign for him. Returning to the car, she had already removed this cover from the clam, so he thought that she was hinting at this to him. But Chan-hong clearly understood that he shouldn't rush, because everything might not go according to plan. Some more time passed and Chan-hong took her home, after which he left home with good feelings. But Selgi was very ashamed then, because she believed that she had ruined the whole day with her problems. She also had a feeling as if he knew about the absence of a cover on the clam, so she was worried. Chang-hoon returned home very late, so he thought that everyone at home was already asleep. But suddenly his stepmother's sister walked past him, and he was very frightened because the house was dark. Then his stepmother invited him to watch a movie with her, but he refused and went to his room because of fatigue. He lay down in his bed and sighed with relief after such a difficult day. Chang-hoon wanted to calmly relax Bobik alone. What happened this afternoon? But suddenly the door to the room began to open, and he was very scared, although he managed to hide. She came to him and wanted to talk to him, but as soon as she thought that he was sleeping, Bobby looked out from under the blanket. But fortunately, the stepmother did not notice this at that moment, because he managed to hide it under the blanket. She came to him to discuss his relationship with his younger sister, because they did not look like a family. The stepmother was always worried about these questions because now they have become a family, but they still look like strangers. But Chang-hong couldn't hear a single word because of what was happening below, even though she was talking about something important. So at this point, he started muttering to himself about turning off the toy. He was very ashamed. Ha-yeon then heard what he was saying and thought that he was telling her to leave his room. Her eyes filled with tears. She felt very hurt in her soul, and she had already turned around to leave his room because she was offended by him. At that moment, he jumped out of bed and tried to stop her. But as soon as she turned around, the toy appeared from under the blanket and she noticed it. He felt very ashamed, but he still said the real reason why he was talking about it under his breath. She just misunderstood everything and tried to immediately leave there because she found out the real reason. But then he stopped her because now he had a problem to solve. They sat on the couch and each of them had different important things on their minds. Hayeon was worried about Chan-hoon because he couldn't get his thoughts together. Suddenly she asked him if she was the problem, and he did not deny. But despite this, he was unable to tell her that this was due to her sudden visits to the room. She began to worry about him because she thought that this was due to the fact that he still continued to think about her. But it was an awkward situation for her because she didn't know what to do. She held the clam behind the cover. She thought that he needed her help again, but she misunderstood him because he was talking about something completely different. But she couldn't let him do what happened the last time again and warned him about it. He didn't understand it right away, but after that she decided to start warming up before the game, even though she didn't intend to play with him. He couldn't believe this was happening again. After all, she said that they could no longer play together. What was she thinking? But at one point he didn't care, and decided to focus on what was happening at the moment and went deeper into the warm-up process. This warm-up ended very quickly, and the stepmother hoped that he felt better from this. But in fact, this was very little for him, and he wanted to continue this game. She tried to stop him again, despite the fact that she herself started it all. But for Chan-hoon, his stepmother started it all first, so he didn't want to stop. It seemed to him that she secretly wanted this. She did not admit it, and only answered him that it was not true, because it seemed to her that he was having a hard time in his life. And in this way she wanted to help him, but this meant that she wanted to play this game with him. He accelerated and was about to launch the game. Although she tried to stop him from time to time, she did nothing for this. Thus, they repeat again what happened last time, and so it continues. She didn't want it, so he decided to stay back while playing. She agreed to this because he would not see her face during this game, so she would be calmer. Even though she said it would be the last time they played together, she actually really enjoyed it and enjoyed it with him. The stepmother was very worried that her sister, who was on the floor below and watching a movie, could hear them. Then Chang-hoon decided that he should finish this game quickly, so that she would not worry so much about it. She had that strange feeling again, but after he finished the first round, she was exhausted and fell. She hoped that she could help him with this game, but in reality, this was not the end for Chang-hoon. He wanted to continue. She was both scared and surprised because he had finished this game twice and was still able to continue. She was worried that she would feel exhausted if they continued to play ball. But at that moment, Chan-hong thanked her for letting him play because he began to feel much better. She made sure that everything would be fine with him, and immediately after that, she left there. And again, only after the end of the match did he regain a clear head. Then he realized that he was going crazy. It was all wrong and he understood it, but he couldn't believe that he did it again with his stepmother. He promised himself that he would no longer do something like that with his stepmother, but he didn't understand what was guiding her at that moment. The stepmother went to her sleeping sister and sat down next to her. After that night, he was finally convinced that he had to change and began to act. From that day on, he began to come up with a bunch of different excuses to avoid her when she unceremoniously barged into him. She tried in every possible way to establish contact with him, but she did not succeed because of his excuses. And one day it seemed to him that Hayeon finally understood his hints because she stopped pestering him. It was an ordinary day and he was playing at his computer again, but suddenly while playing he received a call. At first he was very angry when they called him because he was distracted from the game. But as soon as he found out that this call was from Selgi, he was immediately happy and answered her call. She wanted to meet him, but he was acting at that moment, so he pretended that he was at work. They agreed to meet that evening, so he hung up the call and went on to play his game. The younger sister was accepted to the university, but she did not study there at all, so Chang-hoon was invited there to show it. She had terrible test scores, and during class she sat on her phone and didn't listen to the teacher. The teacher called Irie, but she was surprised at that moment because she didn't expect to see Chan-hoon there. Chang-hong at that moment was very angry with her because he got her into this university, and she let it slip through her hands. Then Silgi came into play, who almost immediately was able to find a common language with this hooligan, and agreed that she would study. Chang-hoon was literally shocked that she was able to achieve this so easily because he couldn't do it at all. Although she agreed that she would study, she did not want it at all and regretted it. He thanked her for spending so much time with his aunt, but then Selgi suddenly started talking about part-time work. Selgi was very surprised because she didn't understand what she was talking about due to the fact that Chang-hoon doesn't have a job. He got into an awkward situation because of this, because he was deceiving Selgi to throw a fishing rod into the river. This scared him very much because he didn't even know what he now needed to tell her so that she would believe him. But he was still able to come up with an excuse and said that he works remotely, so she doesn't know anything about it. Aerie didn't believe that he was working on his computer, so she decided to ask him what he was doing today. Then he began to explain to them in an incomprehensible language how he completed the game today, so that they would think that he was working. He continued to make excuses and was dripping with sweat because of the nerves and shame he felt at that moment. Lesson started, so Aerie ran to class, but then Selgi asked him to stay to talk. He began to worry very much about this because it seemed to him that she understood everything, and now he didn't know what to do. They went to a restaurant that evening, but he noticed that she was hesitating, and it seemed to him that she was angry. In fact, she wanted to ask him to go as her boyfriend to the wedding of their old classmate, because she accidentally blurted out that her boyfriend is the boss of a foreign company, and the only one who was suitable for this role was Chan Hong. He was very surprised because he did not expect to hear such a thing from her, but he could not refuse her, so he had to pretend. They couldn't embarrass themselves this evening, so now they had to practice to remove the awkwardness. After that, they went to the photo booth and took a bunch of funny photos there, but accidentally touched their receptors. Selgi continued to act like a child around him, but she tried to stop doing this because she thought it was strange. Suddenly, he pulled her closer to him, and at that moment, she could not say a word because her heart was beating wildly. It was already quite late and she had to go to work, so they went home and decided to continue next time. Chung Hong was about to leave for his home, but she suddenly stopped him. She invited him to her place so that they could calmly discuss the invented stories that they would tell at the wedding. Then she reminded him that they had just been having fun all day, but they still hadn't decided what kind of dating story they would have. But instead of going to her house, she suddenly reached out to him and decided to repeat that lip trick. She hugged him and it shocked him, so she created the story of how they met. He became very embarrassed and stood there for a few minutes, despite the fact that she had already gone home. Chan-hoon understood that he lied to Selgi a lot and often, so he wanted to correct the situation with his appearance at the wedding. He decided to sneak into his father's room at the moment when his stepmother was sleeping in the living room. Now he was very upset, so he went to his father's room to pick up those things that he did not wear. My father had a lot of things that he never used, and they were premium. The father was a fairly successful man, but even so, the son was very surprised when he saw his watch collection. But suddenly he opened his stepmother's closet and was very surprised. From this, he began to imagine a bunch of different things. Then Chang Hong accidentally found a pink metal detector. The stepmother entered the room, but he managed to hide this toy because he could not appear with it in front of his stepmother. He was very scared, so he didn't have time to put the toy back when he closed the closet. Immediately after that, he ran out of the room and she was upset because she could have helped him find his gold. Chang-hoon's father was supposed to come tonight, but it didn't happen due to some problems, so she was left alone again. There was so much of it that she couldn't even believe that she could do something like that. Chan-hong was making fun of this toy in his room, but he realized that he couldn't keep it. He went to the room to put it in its place while Ha-yeon slept. But standing in front of the room, he saw a slightly strange picture of how she was playing games and calling his name. At that moment, he realized that she saw him as a man after those games and wanted to play with him herself. After that, he went into the room and was sure that now he could definitely calmly play games with his stepmother. She was very embarrassed because he saw all this and came to her with a toy that she had lost. But for him, it was not so important now because he was going to help her, just as she helped him in such situations. She began to enjoy the warm-up before the game, but still continued to say that she did not want to play. She wanted Chan Hong to leave the room as quickly as possible, so she asked him to return the toy to its place and leave. But he understood this phrase a little differently and began to use this toy with her. She was delighted. Chang-hoon continued to bully her during the game because he wanted to hear the truth about himself from her. And despite all attempts to stop him, he still continued to warm up and eventually began to do it. Chan-hong was happy with what was happening because he was sure that it would be better than some rubber. The stepmother realized that she should not do something like that with him, but she could no longer stop. Even the mother's subconscious was sure that he was beautiful, but she herself did not admit it for only one reason. She was very ashamed because she could not restrain herself and showed with all her appearance that she really liked this game. She held back for a very long time, but was already at the limit because Chan Hong behaved very rudely in the game. And that's what happened. Not even a couple of minutes had passed when she suddenly admitted in her voice that she really liked it. Chan-hoon really liked this spectacle, so he decided to demonstrate it to her and went to play right in front of the mirror. Every ball flew straight into the goal, but the stepmother was still ashamed of this because the goal was filled with liquid. Then Chang Hong continued to insist that they could play with each other, despite the fact that they were family. He decided to use his secret tactic of scoring the ball from the air, and it started working because the balls flew deeper. She was very ashamed of her action, even though they were engaged in ordinary adult play. He drove her crazy with his experience in this game because he was a professional. She had lost to him a long time ago, so she only felt the gate. She knew she wouldn't be able to control herself if they continued to play like this, because it was just crazy. Chanhong kept the ball in the air for a long time and scored into the flying goal, but he decided to stop it at her request. They switched back to the most ordinary football, when he can calmly score the ball and enjoy this moment. She understood that she could not be in such a relationship with Chan-hoon, but she could no longer stop because it was pleasant. The stepmother was simply delighted with his stamina because he could continuously bring pleasure to everyone with his game. She had already stopped pretending because she had completely lost control of her mind and began to show pleasure from the game. A few hours later, when it was late at night, Chanhong finally decided to stop and go to his room to rest. But then, as Haeyeon thought, he accidentally took away the toy again, which helped her relax, but it was not so. He took this toy so that she would come to him for this game and go through this process with him. After that night, Chang-hoon decided to change his mind, and now he won't avoid Haeyeon. From that very day, he began to communicate more actively with her and increasingly help with housework. The images of that night were still stored in her memory. It was clear from her because she continued to feel awkward around him. Thus, all his remaining days passed, and then the wedding day came, when he had to try hard. While Chanhong was actively preparing for the wedding and went to the bathroom, his aunt was lying in bed and sleeping. But her phone was ringing because she also had to leave. She was sleepy and didn't pay attention to anything. So she, with her eyes completely closed, got to the bathroom, but an unexpected surprise awaited her there. This surprise was quite long, just like an elephant's trunk, but she was not happy about it, but rather was scared. Chanhong didn't expect that someone would be able to come into his bathroom because the door was locked and he was also very scared. They argued right in the bathroom, but Chanhong lost and he was thrown out of this bathroom without even giving him his things. Eri was embarrassed by this surprise, but also glad that she was able to see the trunk. After a while, they both got ready and were about to leave the house, so Eri noticed his outfit. She was surprised at the way he was dressed because he was handsome and elegant. Even though that was the case, he was not going to answer her questions. He silently left the house, not paying attention to her question about where he was going after all. But right at the exit from the house, she noticed a car. It was Selgi who came home to pick him up. She couldn't believe that Selgi was dating him. They had already come to the wedding, but Chan-hoon was not comfortable there, because he understood that all his success was a lie. Sometime after the event started, he decided to just leave there to relax a little, but Selgi was upset. Leaving there, he felt like a loser compared to others, but suddenly he noticed his stepmother there, who was sitting alone. She immediately approached him because she noticed that he was quite depressed at that moment, and was sad. She was a good girl and immediately supported him, so Chan-hoon decided that he wanted to go for a walk with her and unwind. And just like that, they went for a walk in the middle of the night. Chang-hoon wanted to show her around. They went to the very center of the city and decided to watch the clown performance that took place there at night. Walking through a long and beautiful park, they talked about everything that was in their heads and were happy about it, because they found a common language with each other. This walk really helped them relax. Chang-hoon's stepmother was visiting this city, so she wanted to see everything and wanted to go to the tower but thought it was closed. Then Chang-hong decided to take her to a place that would be better than this tower, where she could see the whole city. But when he brought her there, she was very much embarrassed. It was an unusual place. This place was a skyscraper with a hotel inside. He was sure that she would really like it there. Entering this tower, she was very surprised because she did not think that she would ever be able to see such a beautiful view. She was very happy that she could see the whole city in this guise. Chang-hoon treated me today. They were sitting in a restaurant, and today was a special night because there was a performance from the bartender. The bartender began to do his job and showed people a hilarious performance of how miracles were done with drinks. But during the performance, the bartender made a mistake at one point and accidentally dropped the entire drink, which flew into the stepmother. They immediately began to ask her for forgiveness because of what happened, and then, as compensation, they received a room in this hotel. She was about to refuse this offer, but Chang-hong managed to answer faster and accepted it. She was embarrassed because she believed that only lovers came to such places, but she was going to be more confident with him this time. The stepmother was sure that this time she would be able to refuse him, but as soon as she saw him, she lost her balance. Chan-hoon wanted to relax on this day, so he had fun with his stepmother and was happy about everything. They both enjoyed this moment, but she felt strange then, because of ordinary things she wanted to play. Then he decided to take advantage of the moment, because he noticed that she really wanted it, but he acted carefully. The room was completely ordinary, but what was happening there was very confusing. The clam will soon be happy and moist.